If you don't know Robert Moog by his name, then you likely know him by the music he helped make possible. And to tell the story of Bob Moog's life and his time in the area, the History Center in Tompkins County, in association with the Bob Moog Foundation, is putting on the exhibit Switched On, the birth of the Moog Synthesizer. And here to talk about the exhibit is the History Center's Executive Director, Scott Callan, and its curator, Catherine Duffy. Thank you both so much for joining me this evening.
Thanks a lot.
So just to get us started, let's maybe get a definition of terms. Could one of you just explain for us what a synthesizer actually is?
Sure, I'll give it a shot. A synthesizer, as Bob Moog sort of knew it, really is an electronic instrument that makes it sound by electrons rather than a vibrating string or something like that. So it's a series of circuits and components, and then the musician would shape that to create a sound coming out.
And now that we have that basic definition down, I'm wondering if you can explain to us what Bob Moog's connection is to this area.
Well, Bob came to Cornell in '57 to pursue a PhD in engineering physics. And for most people, pursuing a PhD is the big thing that they do. For Bob, it was sort of a side thing. And while he was here in Ithaca, he was making theremins and theremin kits. And a theremin's a really cool, interesting instrument with two antennae that come out of it. You don't actually touch anything. You just put your hands near it, and it creates this kind of singing sound. So he was doing that, and along the way, he met some interesting people. A couple of early figures that factor into it is a gentleman named Walter Sear. And through Walter Sear, he met a gentleman named Herbert Deutsch. And Herb Deutsch was a young avant-garde composer. And as Deutsch and Moog started talking about how to make new sounds, Bob sort of thought about what he could do for Herb. And he put the initial prototype modular synthesizer together.
And all that happened in Trumansburg, or did that happen here in Ithaca?
When Bob first moved here, he did live in in Ithaca itself, but really the bulk of the Tompkins County history related to Moog happened in Teaburg.
And just in terms of music history, I think today, if you are used to modern music, you can take these kind of electronic sounds for granted because they're so ubiquitous. But how much of a step forward was this kind of work that Bob was doing?
It was really innovative. In fact, I should mention that a majority of this project actually started as an oral history project. And so we had been gathering oral histories from individuals who worked at the factory or Moog musicians or anyone really locally or beyond who's been impacted by Bob and or the synthesizers. So I think the stories we've heard of individuals who worked in the factory and these strange sounds coming out of the factory in small sleepy Trumansburg and the community not fully understanding exactly what was going on is a pretty good indication that these were some very new and unusual sounds.
And what was the community's reception to this kind of work?
According to the individuals we've interviewed, who most of them actually still live in the area, it was difficult for the community, most members of the community, to understand. Trumansburg was a very conservative place in the 60s and early 70s. And one individual in particular would get his hair cut by the same barber, and he would have to re-explain every time he would get his hair cut exactly what he did and exactly what R.A. Moog Co. was.
Let's talk about the present. How did the History Center come to put this exhibit on in the first place?
Yeah, I think initially I knew something of the Moog story before I moved here, and I moved to Ithaca in late 2007. So I went up to Trumansburg not long after getting here thinking I would see Moog history galore, see it everywhere, and I didn't see anything, and I was shocked. So for a couple of years, I would say to people, man, somebody really needs to do something about that. Somebody needs to tell that story. And not long after I got to the History Center, I realized that we could be some people that told the story. So just on a flyer one day, I called Michelle Moog Kusa, who runs the Bob Moog Foundation down in Asheville, North Carolina. And I kind of just said, hey, you want to do something about this? And she didn't know me from anybody, but she thought, well, that must be a cool idea if he's calling me for it. So we did. And along the way, we reformatted it into an oral history project, which I think has been really, really rewarding.
And you mentioned Asheville. I'm guessing Bob Moog moved on from this area at some point.
Yeah, he did. In fact, our story in Tompkins County more or less comes to an end in 1971. The company's bought out by a venture capitalist who moves them closer to Buffalo. After about 10 years there, Bob more or less, I think, got tired of the music industry and moved the family south to Asheville.
So was he still making instruments at that point?
He was, yeah. He continued to make instruments through the 80s, theremins. He couldn't use his name as Moog, so those instruments were under the moniker Big Briar, which is what he nicknamed his house, his rural home there in North Carolina. But then at some point I think it was around 92, he regained the use of his name, and that's what modern Moog Music Incorporated is.
And thinking more about the exhibit, Catherine, you mentioned that this was an oral history project. How has the History Center kind of tackled presenting an oral history project, which you think of maybe as like recorded sound, in this exhibit to people who actually are going to be able to come and physically see this?
That's a great question. It was very difficult to decide. Everyone's story, everyone we interviewed, had such a rich story, a meaningful story, and it was very difficult for us to sort of trim out some pieces that we felt were still very important to the story of Moog in Tompkins County. We'll have audio clips that visitors can hear when they come to visit, and we've pulled out some select quotes that will have graphics on the wall that include the text. And then, of course, this collection is available for researchers to come, and it's all been transcribed so they can research the words, and we share it with the Bob Moog Foundation, so anyone in Asheville can also access the same information if they so choose.
So this is going to be, people are going to come here, they're going to hear voices, they're going to hear music. Do the two of you have any favorite kind of songs featuring the synthesizer?
Yeah, we struggle with that question, I think, all the time. Ask me on another day, I'll tell you another song. But right now, it would probably be Flashlight by Parliament. And that big bumping bass line is a Moog synth. It's a mini Moog, and it's played by Bernie Worrell. And we somehow had the good fortune of interviewing Bernie for the project. So... Yeah, I would say today it's Flashlight. Tomorrow, something different.
How about you, Catherine?
I can't decide. I can rarely pick one favorite of anything. I wouldn't say mine changes, but it's really difficult. My musical taste runs a pretty broad spectrum, so and the synthesizer is pretty much inundated in a lot of music nowadays.
Well, when does the exhibit actually get started?
We have a soft opening on Thursday the 1st, and that's an invitation only for the individuals who have assisted us with this project. The official opening is Friday, May 2nd at 5 o'clock, and it will run through May 2015, so it's actually up for a full year.
And where can people find out more information just in advance of maybe coming out in May?
Yeah, historycenter.net, thehistorycenter.net, our website. Also find us on Facebook, where we post a lot of event invitations and the like, and it is definitely worth checking out. We've got, more programs throughout the month of May than I can remember right now, but we've packed it full of things to do Moog related, and we are working with some really cool partners in town. Argosin is hosting some, Cinemapolis, doing Moog Mondays there, so definitely check out the website.
So it sounds like the month of May is going to be a month of Moog.
Officially at the History Center, most definitely.
Yeah.
Well, I have been speaking with Scott Callan and Catherine Duffy, the Executive Director and Curator, respectively, of the History Center in Tompkins County, about their exhibit Switched On, the birth of the Moog Synthesizer, which runs from May 2nd through May 2015. Thank you both so much for joining me this evening.
Thanks a lot.